Oh, do we have some creepy boys for you today? Brain-blasting, tentacle-teasing, slime-covered aliens from out of time. These are Illithids, otherwise known as Mind Flayers. Let's get into it. So Illithids are humanoids with dark purple or grey skin, constantly coated in a thin film of slime, hands with 3 fingers and a thumb, 2 toes amid webbed feet, and 4 tentacles protruding from their face. They're normally tall and quite slender, they tend to hover rather than walk, and they will blast your mind like listening to funk meme compilations from the dark recesses of YouTube. They're masters of intellect. They're known for bending all manner of creatures to their will by either destroying their poor victim's mental ability to think for itself, or with their little itty-bitty tadpoles they push up your nose, it eats your brain, getting all your memories, and then wiggles its way to the base of your skull and attaches to your spine, controlling you in a much more graceful manner than that of the Cordyceps from the Last of Us series. And how good is that series right now? So Illithids are most commonly feared for not only making you subservient to them and their elder brain's goals, but should they feel peckish, eat your brain right out of your skull, or right from inside your skull. And that leads me on to how they procreate. Back to that itty-bitty tadpole. So Illithids are hermaphrodites who produce asexually. They lay around 1,000 eggs at a time. These are then placed in a brain pool, normally with an elder brain, at the centre of a Mind Flayer city. These then sit for a month till they hatch into tadpoles, where they will chew and grow for around 10 years. During this time, they will be fed a brain-based puree. Almost the entirety of the clutch of eggs will have been consumed by the elder brain, and when they are finally pulled for ceremorphosis, they are a whopping 3 inches long. They have a little lamprey mouth and 4 tentacles at the base of their body, making a tail. These can be inserted through the ear, nose, or eye of a humanoid, whereas mentioned it eats your brain, attaches to your spine, and it can either control you for a time or begin the ceremorphosis process, that then converting the host body into an illithid. These normally come out as your normal looking Mind Flayer, but depending on the host can come out different. This process normally takes days to complete the transformation into what we see as a Mind Flayer, normally a week, but the Mind Flayer doesn't actually fully mature until around 21 years after ceremorphosis. And because it is worth mentioning, not every humanoid can be used as a host. First off, the humanoid must be in peak physical health, and any underlying illnesses or diseases writes a specimen off immediately. And much like Tinder, there are height requirements too, between 5'4" and 6'2". There's also a preferred weight, ranges to between 130 and 270 pounds. This is because if they're too big, the transformation takes too much of a toll on the tadpole, whereas if the host is too small, they cannot gain enough material from the host to perfect the transformation. Though exceptions exist, such as the squidlings, which are transformed gnomes. And just to highlight a fun little mishap here, though gnome physiology, be it their species or their innate ability to mess with magic, it doesn't play well with most transformations, magical, ceremorphosis, or otherwise, so they look like this. Back to it. But that threat of a failed transformation will not limit their experimentation. Oh, no. See, Illithids have a bit of the mad scientist about them. They're willing to sacrifice a tadpole that has been gestating for a decade just to see if they can transform a yeti into some kind of abomination or something like that. Unfortunately for us DMs, some of these have been a success. Not going into mad detail here, but the different types are very interesting and or terrifying. For example, the Zagandi, which are lizard folk who have befallen the transformation. The transformation doesn't necessarily give them tentacles, though it does give them protrusions from the back of their head that they can use as mandibles and can spit acid from. And also the absolutely terrifying Euphorion. This is the cross between a roper and an illithid. Who'd have thought that was a good idea? It has reach for days, 50 feet in fact, the ability to restrain, Mind Blast, which stuns their prey, and then add in their ultimate hunger for brains. This is a monster that just screams, kill that player in particular. You just know someone really peeved their DM off for that fate to come a knocking. There's also possibly the most well-known of the altered illithids, which is the Mind Witness. These are beholders who have been transformed. They're ultimately subservient to illithids, and whenever within range of their psionic control, do nothing but what they're told to. Stopping short, or not, of breathing. The fun part about these is that they pretty much act as walkie-talkies. They extend the range of any illithid chatter between them, allowing for more mind control or conversations, or sharing of ideas. Coming to an end of the variants here, but I can't not mention these little buggers. Cranium rats. If you watch Dice Camera Action, you may be familiar with Strix's rat Stinky, who was in fact a cranium rat. And cranium rats are vermin that have been exposed to massive psionic energy from illithids, enhancing their own intellect and also allowing them to merge their intellect. For instance, and I can't remember who said this, but a lone cranium rat will be able to get cheese out of a trap safely. 10 cranium rats will beat you at chess. They're a swarm creature, and if you want to drop hints about your players, or drop hints to your players about the enemy that they're about to face, without outright saying Mind Flayer, let those with a high passive perception notice the odd rat with an exposed brain. Okay, last one, and I'm going to mention of these transformed things, is a brain stealer dragon. A dragon with 4 tentacles instead of a head and just 2 milky eyes. No breath weapon? No. Who needs that when you can psionically blast everything around you and be immune to any kind of psychic damage at all? And as they got older, they developed a greater and greater resistance to magic. Tentacles. Bad dragons. Being restrained by ropers. Mentioning Tinder. This video will never be monetized. Those are the types of monsters Mind Flayers have transformed, but there's also different kinds of Mind Flayers. For a start, we have the Illithid. Now, looking at this, you're probably thinking, but Mr. Milky Man, that looks like an Illithid. And you'd be right, except you'd be wrong. Once in every 100 tadpoles or so, you get an Illithid, which has 6 tentacles. Ha! But you didn't recognize that. These Illithids are angrier and more spiteful, and they slam the door and play their music loud when they are angry at their parents for not letting them go to the 30 Seconds to Mars concert with their friends. It's not a phase, Mum. No, these are the Illithids that eventually break off from their colony, taking half it with them and usually serving up their own brains to become the elder brain of that new colony. They also live twice as long as regular Illithids and are much taller, normally between 7 and 9 feet. Big boys. Not so much a variant, but a great story device would be the Vampire Illithid. A Vampire Illithid would need to sate its thirst for blood as well as its hunger for brains. And these conflicting, unrelenting wants would probably drive the Mind Flayer purely feral, and those deaths would be both numerous and violently graphic, and as such, any party who catches wind of such a threat will know that something is foul, and, dangerous as heck. There are actually quite a lot of Lich Illithids that, rather than calling them Illithiliches, which is fun to say, we call them Alhoons. Alhoons. And, little plug moment here, if you don't know what a Lich is, check out my last video. I'll link it in the description too. No, that's 2 undead types of Illithid. Why so many? Well, you see, renegade Illithids who are either cast out of their colony or leave themselves will inevitably come to contemplate their death, and how their memories and thoughts will cease to provide a function when they are gone. So they make it so they can live even beyond death. And I haven't really mentioned it to this point, but Illithids are hive mind. They share a consciousness in some senses. Within the influence of the elder brain, they are telepathically linked, providing brain power to the summations of the whole rather than the singular. Kind of like the cranium rats that I mentioned earlier, but on a much larger scale. So, contemplating life without your elder brain link will likely lead to thoughts of how can I live as long as possible, which is textbook codependency and not a healthy relationship. The last variant I will mention here is, well, the most hated by both Illithid and every other race alike. You know those tadpoles we mentioned earlier? What if the elder brain died, and those tadpoles had to eat it and, then each other to survive? Like sharks in utero, eating the weaker ones before they're born. What would become of that last tadpole were they to survive? Would that be a true, pure Illithid? Or some absolutely horrific aberration that belongs in some Lovecraftian snuff fanfic? No surprises here, it's the second one! A Neothelid is a worm-like being that hungered only for sentient brains, no matter where it came from or what it was in, making it a threat to its own ilk. It had similar powers to that of a Mind Flayer, such as telekinesis, levitation, able to use mind blasts, and having a unique ability of being able to use an acid attack that would strip flesh from bone but leave the brain intact, And even more terrifying for Illithids, it had such a low intellect, its thoughts cannot be detected or read. Not that it was able to mask them, it was just so dumb and driven by only its hunger for everything. Everything it does is survival and reflex. If this thing didn't have blind sight, you'd be able to paint a tunnel on a wall and it would squirm head first into it. Oh, and it can grow to be 120 feet tall. These things need to use purple worm tunnels to get around because they don't know how to burrow. Like a big dog, they don't know how strong they are. They don't know that they can dig for themselves. They're just a mindless death machine. See how you want to bring a big bad monstrosity from beyond the HP Lovecraft Veil? Get you one of these. I realise now that I haven't mentioned their D&D origins, and that was in fact back in the spring edition of the official TSR newsletter in 1975. They are Gary Gygax's creation, though he was inspired by the cover art of The Burrowers Beneath by Brian Lumley. The original art was by Tim Kirk. Shifting gears back into Illithid lore, well, I mentioned in my Aboleth video that Illithids are actually time travelers. We don't know where they came from or at what point in the future or past they came to be, but we just know that when they showed up en masse thousands of years ago and started overthrowing civilizations, even beyond the outer planes and traveling to the astral sea, kidnapping more and more species, they were here to mess things up. And I don't mean like they took over towns or cities. They ruled entire galaxies. For some reason, I imagine a Mind Flayer city to look like H.R. Geiger's cityscapes. Terrifying and cool. They stripped species from existence and replaced them with their own creations or mutations. Just an example, the Gith, both Githzerai and Githyanki, derived their species name from a revolutionary named Gith. As in, their species did not have a name until somebody did that. Either because it was forgotten due to millennia of enslavement and psionic mind barrages from Illithids, or they were an Illithid creation and we don't have the name in our vocabulary for them. It's thought by some that Gith were created by Illithids, whereas others posit that the Gith are the mutated result of experiments on humanoids to make them more adaptable to the outer planes. Anyway. Illithids roamed planet to planet, dominating it, ridding the worlds of sentient life, experimenting, fighting new and diverse thralls, mining the planet of its resources, pack up and go do it all again. In a way, kinda like how Shepard picks up new and diverse party members, mines planets completely of their materials, and then moves on to Earth with the Geth. Yeah. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch, but I will do anything to spotlight Mass Effect, so go play it. It's great. Great solo player story. Illithids did this over and over again, eventually getting complacent in the Gith servitude, granting them some psionic abilities of their own to aid them in their day-to-day duties. But the Gith utilized their new powers to fight back against their overseers, blasting them right back with their psionic powers, but also overpowering them in sheer numbers and strength due to the Illithids' aversion to manual labour. This revolution set the other thralls of the Mind Flayers free, allowing them to fight back alongside the Gith. I imagine it was some menagerie of species all fighting back. The Gith species then split into two peoples, the Githyanki and the Githzerai. The Githzerai are more peaceful and seek to strike a balance of the evil the Illithid wrought upon the worlds, and the Githyanki actively hunt the Illithids and believe existence should be rid of them, which ultimately led to the lack of any remnants of Illithid civilizations in the known realms. Or Forgotten Realms. Another race forever tainted by the Illithids actually happened after this time travel, which is the Duergar. Some people pronounce it Duergar, others pronounce it Duaugar. I say Duergar. They were forced by the Mind Flayers to dig down into their dwarven cities, and once there, attack and pillage their own people. We know you need to know ahead of this next part, which will explain a lot, but Mind Flayers don't see how we see. Those milky white eyes don't grant them dark vision or normal sight. Instead, they see in infrared. Thus, they hate the sun, absolutely abhor sunlight, and apparently will actively snuff out, or block it if they can, on any systems they conquer. So anyway, the Illithids then told the dwarves to keep digging, so far down in fact that they hit the Underdark. They then kept the Duergar as thralls, servants, and over time changed them to better suit their needs. In keeping with their arrogance, of course. They thought the same thing couldn't happen twice, so they gave them some of their servants certain capabilities. Nothing psionic this time, that would be silly. No, just let them maintain some of their magic abilities and allow them to double in size at will. What could go wrong? So anyway, that's how the Durgar kicked off their own revolution and now live as their own people in the Underdark. They're just trying to live their best lives, but ultimately tainted by their change. Outcast by their ancestors, but proud of their struggle and ultimate survival despite their most hated foe. Other species besides the Gith and Durgar have befallen subjugation, such as the Kuatoa, Quaggas, Hooked Horrors, Grimlocks, Ogres, and much more. Want to talk about something interesting here, by the way? Touched on it before, but let's expand. It's that Illithids are masters of psionic abilities. And that's my cat scratching at the door trying to get out. Okay, she's away now. A lot of their domination powers, despite some people thinking they're magically enacting a spell, is actually done by the combined brain power of the entire colony. This type of domination takes such a toll on the victim that their intelligence scores halved. By the end of the thrall formation, the victim has an entirely different personality, alignment, and even proficiencies. Probably even changing your favourite foods as well. This leads me on to the next little fact I want to mention about Mind Flayers, is that they don't use arcane magic. I know I mentioned it already that they are masters of psionic magic, but everything about them just screams mad intelligent wizard to me. Doesn't mean that they can't learn arcane magic, they can, though these are seen as lesser mind flayers among their society. Instead of perfecting the power of their minds, they instead resort to using components and artifacts of magical power. And just clarifying, most Illithids do use magic items as they see them as great tools, but spells? Pfft, out of here with that arcane stuff. Most Arcanists' Mind Flayers are exiled from their communities, hence leading to the Alhun. And keeping with the Hun sound, I want to mention the Cult of Thun. Yes, the Cult of Thun. The Cult of Thun wasn't formed in, or by any normal sense. There wasn't one breakaway Illithid who made others drink the Kool-Aid. A group of them just went on a pilgrimage to the Cavern of Thought on the Plain of Deep Caverns in the Far Realms. And on their way there, they seem to have been teleported to another realm where they encountered a being, or so we think, called Thun. These Mind Flayers were there for a number of weeks, and when they came back, they were altered. Their abilities had grown exponentially, they could construct incredible machines and devices, began selective breeding programs, and just seemed awakened to a higher sense. When questioned what had happened or who gave them this knowledge, all they could reply was Thun is Thun, and Thun is all. They also do not long for brains like normal Mind Flayers. They rely on a substance known as quintessence. They use this substance as fuel for their creations and to feed their own bodies. Quintessence is vague in where it comes from. It seems like it can be found as an aura in some places, but can also be harvested from certain creatures. They then refine it into a green flowing liquid for use or consumption. And the Cult of Thun definitely give off techno-horror vibe, where the wires control you like a puppet and they modify themselves and their thralls to have blades instead of arms, or add arms, or have acid spitting tubes or flamethrowers. Just real twisted stuff, but oh, how you could use these as a story hook. Particularly their infiltrators, which are essentially insects made of wires that attach to the spine and control and sustain the host. A bit like the regular Mind Flayer's Intellect Devourer, but from the outside, instead of teleporting into your head, eating your brain, and controlling you from in there. What Thun wants, and what they are, it's up to you, as a DM. But if you want to throw something out of the norm, even for aliens, at your players, this is a story for you to explore. So all these variants, these abilities, these conquests, the space-tripping, time-skipping beasties, and all in service to their great Elder Brains. But what do the Elder Brains want? Well, bluntly, to guide their Illithids to dominate all civilizations and amass all knowledge in known existence. And how they achieve this? Well, that's up to you, DM. If you have an inkling of horror below, a plane-skipping tyrannical force, or the classic town controlled by one horrid brain mass acting their own and every command of will, that's your Elder Brain supported by the mass of Illithids it has in hand. Or in its brain pool in this instance. And I can give you a very quick rundown on the physiology of the Elder Brain. Dead Mind Flayer brains. An Illithid sacrifices their brain through a specific process. They then merge with the brain pool, and any Illithids that then perish of natural causes or circumstances, or sacrifice their brain to join the Elder Brain, they just do and make it stronger. This is a great honour in Mind Flayer society, as they believe it lets them live on. But in actual fact, and this is a closely guarded secret, when an Illithid brain merges with the Elder Brain, it takes only your psionic energy and memories, and casting aside your personality and ideas. Ultimately making the brains of the community guides its own slaves in death. Kind of ironic. I would normally finish a video with a few fun facts, but Illithids are so vast and such cool little tidbits exist about them that I'm going to need to take a few minutes here, so get your pens and pencils at the ready. One thing a lot of folks talk about when they describe Illithids are their lamprey mouths. I had to Google a lamprey, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I had no clue what the heck they were on about, and I just imagined a shark that instead of chomping down worked in a circular motion, kind of like a boring drill to get through to your skull and into the tasty brains. But it turns out this isn't what their mouths are used for. Well, it can be, but healthy mind flayers secrete a fine acidic film from their tentacles that is so corrosive to skin it looks like that they are actually pushing their tentacles right into your brain, or into your head. And speaking of tasty brains, oh boy, this is chilling. So brains apparently taste different depending on a person's mood. And this kind of makes sense because if you think of your emotions and how different chemicals in our brains affect us, like serotonin, adrenaline, endorphins, all that crack, it's like our bodies marinating our brains for consumption. Long story short, if we check back at that trailer for Baldur's Gate 3, we see that you, the player, look away from your attacker. As you would. But using telekinesis, the Illithid forces you to watch. Rather than place the tadpole in your nostril or ear, forces it in through your eye. This is to flood your body with adrenaline, panic, shock, and fear. And according to Illithids, terrified brains taste best. 9 out of 10 doctors say brains taste best terrified. Illithids use ships known as nautiloids to travel through space, and it's even believed that they use one of their dreadnought nautiloids to travel back in time. You can see these ships in great detail in the Baldur's Gate 3 cinematic introduction, though Larian Studios took liberty with two main features shown. The first being the tentacles on the front of the ship can teleport beings inside, which makes sense for intelligent creatures to have that as a feature. And the second, the ship's ability to plane shift. Oh, and when it does that, they show a bass string-like device thrumming, which is really cool, because one of the components of the plane shift spell is a tuning fork. It's very cool. Just makes the musician in me scream in giddiness, and such a cool little detail. And I would definitely recommend putting that in your games if you have these ships. One of the great recorded quotes from a Mind Flayer is from Cork L. Schlurk. I think that's how that's pronounced, I don't know. Don't cry, we have no intention of eating your brain. In fact, your brain's going on a wonderful journey. Cork was an Illithid, by the way, who would cultivate intellect devourers. Yeah, my neighbours are making a lot of noise. Illithid mucus can smell like onions, garlic, or vanilla. Cheers for that weirdly real fact, AJ. And the last fun fact for you all. Illithids have no vocal cords. None. They use telepathy to speak, and when they can, as their bodies have evolved to not need them. That doesn't mean that they can't speak. Mind Flayers' tentacles are so precise and intricate that they can actually place one of their tentacles down their throat and emulate speech to an incredible degree. How's that for a gag reflex? And on that note, I'm finishing up here. Okay, right. Please check out my last video, like, subscribe, all that kind of crack if you want to, and yeah, check back for more of these soon. Looks like I'm doing these every 2 weeks. I want to get more out, but it's looking like that's the way it goes. Anyway, you want to check out a video about liches? Liches. Go check them out. Right, thank you. Goodbye. Take care. See you in the next video.